Well, originally, my dear friend and book agent, I'm going to shout out to Johanna Castillo, who also helped discover Colleen originally when she was at Atria Books. She sent me the book because she knew I was looking for content for Wayfair Studios that could really affect and touch people's lives. And so she sent me this book. It had this like pink flowery cover, and I had never read a romance novel before. So I remember getting into bed, I know I wrote a book called Man Enough, and yet I remember feeling like strangely not man enough to read this book. I was like kind of embarrassed. And my wife looks over and she's like, "What are you reading?" And I was like, Johanna sent it to me. It's supposed to be amazing. And the book at the time hadn't become like this massive global phenomenon. So I start reading, and boom, Ryle comes on the rooftop. We meet Lily. So I start reading, and we meet Lily Bloom. She's on this rooftop, and bam, Ryle comes in, and they start having this conversation, and it's like sexy and interesting, and I'm finding myself like suddenly understanding what so many millions of women gravitate to, and I'm gravitating to it, and I'm like, oh, I could read more romance novels. And as the book gets deeper and deeper, and kind of the layers of the onion are unpeeled, and you start to understand what the book is really about, I just remember having this moment of like, oh wow, I haven't ever seen anything like this. I actually recently went back and read all of our email exchanges from 5 years ago, from 2019. And it was a really interesting time because I started reading the book, but I was right in the middle of releasing my first film, 5 Feet Apart. And simultaneously, I was shooting a TV show that I was on called Jane the Virgin. And we had just had a baby, and things were just crazy. But I was so hooked on this book, and I was committed to finishing it, that it took me a little longer than I wanted to. So I would like start it, I'd read 5 chapters, and then I'd have to go, and I couldn't get back to it for a week or so. So my emails to Colleen and our back and forths were like, okay, I've just started the book. Oh my gosh. And then a few weeks later, and then I remember finishing the book, and I wrote Colleen this like impassioned letter, just pouring my heart out and saying like, this is why I'm a filmmaker. This is why we started Wayfair Studios, to tell stories like this. And if this book, before it had become a global sensation, had already helped thousands of women leave situations like Lily was in, I knew that if we could find a way to adapt it, which we knew wasn't going to be easy, then we had the potential to impact millions of lives. And that's why I'm in this business. Nothing against just popcorn movies, but I feel like for me, I want to touch people's souls. And this book and Colleen, it reached in and touched my soul. And I wanted to pay that forward. What was interesting at the time was that this was not a big book. This was Colleen Hoover in 2019 was a secret. She was like, which is so interesting, because I kind of think of Colleen, like I think about like a woman who's about to have twins. And the twins aren't here yet, but it's very clear that she's pregnant and something amazing is about to come into this world. And Colleen had written all these books, but Hollywood had kind of just missed it. And I don't know why. And for some reason, I felt so honored to be given the opportunity to kind of discover this book before it had become such a mainstream success. And so, yeah, I remember sharing it with my wife and saying like, babe, I'm really excited. And I asked her to read the book. And then I remember sharing it with my company and like coming in and being so like overly boyishly excited, and telling all of the men, like, you guys have to read this book now. And all of them came back with just like, oh my God, I didn't know what I was going to start reading, but it touched me so deeply. Which is why I believe this isn't just a movie for women. I believe this is a movie for everybody. I really believe that this film, if a woman takes a man, if a man takes a man, I believe that everybody will be able to have the same experience, because there is something for everybody in this movie. And love doesn't discriminate, trauma doesn't discriminate, and the choices that we make and our healing are universal. And at the end of the day, it's a film about hope. So I felt hopeful after reading the book, feel hopeful after watching the movie. And I really hope that, pun intended, that comes across and that people leave the film thinking deeply, introspectively, and also feeling that there's hope for them. As we were starting to figure out who was going to be our Lily, a lot of names were thrown around. And at one point, Blake's name came up. And what I found fascinating was looking at the reactions of the various women in the room as we were talking about potential Lilies and seeing how many of them lit up when they heard the name Blake Lively. And for me, it was really important to cast somebody as Lily who was going to be approachable, was going to be likable, and that women could relate to, while also being aspirational. That's a really hard thing to cast. Because, look, there are a lot of amazing actresses that I just don't believe women relate to. And Lily had to be a mix of confident and strong and funny and charismatic and sarcastic and also deep. And it takes a very unique person to be able to be all of those things.